time will come when old fruit trees no longer perform efficiently and an orchard will have to be replaced to make way for new trees. Let's have a look at the processes used to replace an old orchard with a new one. A very efficient way to remove the old trees is by using a track excavator. The entire tree is removed and put into a chipper on site and can be used as a mulch. To find out what is happening within the soil, 4 soil profile holes are dug per hectare on a 50 by 50 meter grid to a depth of 1.2 meters. In the hole, you can see exactly where the clay layer begins. A soil scientist is asked to have a look at these soil profile holes. He will sort the holes into groups that are very similar. He may say holes number 1 to number 5 are a very similar soil. We can take one sample there. Holes number 6 and 7 will need to have a separate sample, and holes number 8, 9 and 10 will be grouped for a final sample. The soil scientist will then take samples from each of the sections to the lab for testing. Normally 3 samples are taken from each hole, one at 30 centimeters in depth, a second at 60 centimeters deep, and one at 90 centimeters in depth. No samples are taken below the clay layer. After conducting his tests, the soil scientist will determine what extra fertilizer is needed for the soil and provide this information to the farmer. Usually, this is just an extra application of lime and phosphate which is broadcast on top of the land. The next step is to turn the ground over. It can be ripped with a ripper tine or ploughed with a delf plough. Both are pulled behind a bulldozer. A third option is to use a track excavator which will lift the soil and turn it over, giving great aeration and mixing the soil well. It's very important not to lift clay from the clay layer and mix it into the topsoil. The ground will be destroyed and will take many years to recover. If you're planting the same kind of fruit on the site as was there before, for example, if you take out an apple orchard and then plant new apple trees, or peaches on peaches, or pears on pears, a disease called specific replant disease could affect the new orchard. Specific replant disease will result in the new orchard performing poorly and must be avoided. The organisms that cause apple replant disease vary by geographic location. In most areas, fungal pathogens and nematodes are the main culprits. Fumigation of the ground removes the possibility of specific replant disease affecting the new trees. Fumigation is done with a ripper tine behind a tractor. A pipe runs along the ripper tine, placing a fumigation product into the soil. The fumigant kills everything in the soil, including bacteria and insects. It's the only way to be completely assured of getting good results when replanting the same kind of fruit. A plastic sheet is rolled off behind the ripper tine to keep the fumigant in the soil. If a different type of fruit is planted in the piece of ground, for example, pears in an old apple orchard or apples in an old pear orchard, then specific replant disease is not likely to be a threat. The soil scientist will also advise on whether or not to put drainage in and whether or not to ridge the orchard. Ridging puts a bit more soil around the middle of the planting rows. Drainage is put in after ploughing and takes different forms which will be discussed in another program. Once the land has been prepared, it should not be driven over with a tractor as the soil will become compacted. Mark out the rows, and once this is done, you can drive down the tractor rows. After preparing the land, the farmer will need to take precautionary actions to safeguard against erosion. Soil preparation is one of the vital aspects of fruit farming and will have a huge effect on the farm's production in later years. It's best not to skimp on soil preparation or take any shortcuts.